Sometimes the greatest miracle begins long before anyone realizes a life has been saved. Three glossy black Cadillacs rolled slowly down the narrow country road, their polished paint reflecting the soft morning sunlight, as though they belonged in front of a skyscraper instead of a weathered farmhouse tucked between endless Nebraska fields. Curtains shifted behind neighboring windows. Front doors opened one after another. Farmers paused halfway through loading their pickup trucks. Children riding bicycles stopped without saying a word. Nobody in Maple Ridge had ever seen a procession like this. The lead Cadillac came to a gentle stop in front of a modest white farmhouse with peeling paint and a small auto repair garage standing beside it. A faded wooden sign above the garage door read, "Honest Work Matters." The garage itself looked ordinary, with well-used tools, an old hydraulic lift, and several aging trucks waiting for repairs, but everyone in town knew the man who worked there never charged people for work they did not truly need. The rear passenger door opened first. A tall blonde woman stepped out wearing an elegant navy business suit that somehow looked perfectly natural against the peaceful countryside. She carried herself with quiet confidence rather than pride, her blue eyes searching the front porch instead of the curious crowd gathering along the road. Behind her, several security professionals and senior executives remained respectfully beside the vehicles, making no attempt to draw attention to themselves. Their presence only deepened the mystery. Moments later, the front screen door opened with its familiar creak. Ethan Walker stepped outside, wearing his usual brown flannel shirt, faded blue jeans, and worn leather work boots. Grease still marked one sleeve from finishing a repair only minutes earlier. His 9-year-old daughter, Lily, stood beside him, gently holding his hand while looking curiously at the unexpected visitors. Ethan frowned slightly, trying to understand why someone dressed for a corporate boardroom had arrived at his home without warning. The elegant woman took one slow breath before walking across the gravel driveway. She stopped only a few feet from Ethan, her expression softening as if she had finally found something she had searched for through a sleepless night. For several silent seconds, neither of them spoke. The neighbors exchanged confused glances. Even the morning birds seemed to fall quiet. Then, without hesitation, the woman stepped forward and wrapped Ethan in a heartfelt embrace. Gasps rippled through the watching crowd. Ethan remained completely still, surprised by a gesture he never expected from a stranger. When she finally stepped back, tears shimmered gently in her eyes, though her voice remained calm. "You gave me another tomorrow," she whispered. Ethan searched her face with growing confusion. Something about her eyes felt familiar, but the memory remained just beyond reach. Lily looked from her father to the elegant visitor, sensing there was a story hidden beneath the silence. The woman smiled warmly at the little girl before looking back at Ethan. "You probably do not remember me," she said quietly. "But 24 hours ago, when everyone else believed they had run out of time, you refused to give up." Ethan's breathing slowed as distant memories began returning like fragments carried by the wind. Dark storm clouds, freezing water, a sinking aircraft, a frightened woman reaching toward him through rising floodwater. 24 hours earlier, on the opposite side of Silver Lake, an ordinary mechanic had made one decision that would quietly change every life standing in that driveway forever. The memory returned with the quiet certainty of sunrise, carrying Ethan Walker back exactly 24 hours before 3 black Cadillacs found their way to his front yard. The previous morning had begun like hundreds before it, with soft golden light stretching across the Nebraska fields while dew rested on the tall grass surrounding his modest farmhouse. Ethan woke before dawn, as he always did, moving quietly through the small kitchen so he would not disturb his 9-year-old daughter. He prepared blueberry pancakes from his late wife's handwritten recipe, humming an old country tune she used to sing while coffee filled the room with its familiar warmth. A few minutes later, Lily shuffled into the kitchen wearing oversized socks and rubbing sleep from her eyes. She smiled the moment she smelled breakfast. "You made Mom's pancakes again," she said happily. Ethan smiled back. "She would not forgive me if I forgot the recipe." They shared breakfast around the small wooden table beneath framed family photographs that had faded gently with time. Although grief still lived quietly inside the house, it no longer controlled every conversation. Instead, it had become part of the love that still surrounded them. After walking Lily to the small elementary school at the edge of town, Ethan unlocked the doors to Walker Auto Repair just as the first customers arrived. The garage was never the largest in the county, nor the busiest, but people drove from neighboring towns because they trusted the man behind the wrench. Ethan believed a mechanic repaired more than machines. He protected families, road trips, first jobs, and memories attached to every vehicle that rolled into his garage. An elderly farmer arrived worried that his truck needed an expensive transmission replacement. Ethan spent nearly an hour inspecting every component before discovering nothing more than a worn sensor worth less than $40. The grateful customer reached for his wallet after the repair, but Ethan quietly charged only for the replacement part and a small amount of labor. "You could have billed me for a whole transmission," the farmer admitted. Ethan simply shrugged. "You came here for honesty, not surprises." Later that morning, his longtime friend Ben Carter leaned against the garage doorway with a cup of coffee and laughed. "One of these days, your kindness is going to make you rich." Ethan wiped grease from his hands with an old shop towel before smiling. Kindness is not an investment. If you expect something back, it stops being kindness. Ben shook his head with a grin. "You really believe that, do you not?" Ethan looked toward the wooden sign hanging above the entrance, painted years ago by his wife in careful white letters. "Honest work matters." "Every single day," he answered softly. The afternoon drifted by with ordinary repairs, friendly conversations, and the comforting rhythm of impact wrenches echoing through the garage. Nothing suggested that before sunset his life would change forever. Shortly before closing time, dark clouds gathered unexpectedly across the western sky. The peaceful blue horizon disappeared behind towering walls of charcoal gray as distant thunder rolled over the open farmland. The wind picked up with surprising force, bending tree branches and sending loose leaves dancing across the gravel parking lot. Ethan stepped outside to secure several tool carts before the rain arrived. As he looked toward the darkening sky, an unfamiliar sound reached his ears. It was deeper than thunder and far too low to ignore. High above Silver Lake, a private jet struggled against the violent storm, descending lower than any aircraft should ever fly over the quiet Nebraska countryside. The aircraft continued losing altitude as sheets of rain swept across Silver Lake, turning the calm water into a restless gray surface that reflected flashes of lightning. Ethan Walker stood motionless for only a second before instinct replaced surprise. He reached into his pocket, dialed emergency services, and spoke with remarkable clarity despite the growing wind. "A private jet is coming down near Silver Lake. Send every rescue unit you have." Before the dispatcher could ask another question, Ethan was already running toward his old pickup truck. The drive to the public boat launch took less than 4 minutes, but each passing second felt far longer as the aircraft disappeared behind the curtain of rain. When Ethan reached the shoreline, several fishermen had already gathered beneath the shelter of a small pavilion, watching helplessly as the business jet touched the water in a controlled emergency landing before slowly drifting farther from shore. The impact sent a broad wave rolling across the lake, but the aircraft remained largely intact, floating lower with every passing moment. "The rescue boats are coming," one man shouted. Ethan never looked away from the aircraft. They may not arrive fast enough. Without another word, he pulled an emergency flotation vest from an old storage compartment inside. His truck. Years earlier, after losing a close friend in a flood, Ethan had volunteered with a county water rescue training program. Although he had never become a professional rescuer, he had kept every lesson close to his heart. He tightened the straps across his chest, kicked off his heavy work boots, and handed his truck keys to one of the fishermen. "If my daughter calls, tell her I will be home as soon as I can." Then he ran into the cold water. Each powerful stroke carried him farther from shore, while rain blurred the horizon into a single wall of gray. Inside the aircraft, the atmosphere remained tense but disciplined. Flight attendants calmly directed passengers toward emergency exits while the captain assured everyone that rescue teams were on the way. Victoria Sterling remained seated only long enough to help an elderly passenger fasten a flotation device before standing herself. Few people aboard recognized her true identity because she often traveled privately without publicity. Even fewer knew the quiet secret she carried beneath her tailored Navy business suit. Earlier that morning, her physician had confirmed she was expecting a child, news she had chosen to keep entirely private until the right moment. As she moved carefully toward the aircraft exit with the other passengers, she instinctively rested one hand across her stomach, silently promising the tiny life she carried that everything would be all right. Outside, inflatable emergency rafts were being deployed with practiced efficiency, yet one unexpected wave shifted the aircraft slightly, causing several loose items inside the cabin to slide across the floor. Victoria noticed a small leather journal resting near the aisle where it had fallen during the landing. It contained personal letters her late father had written before his passing, something she could never replace. She quickly picked it up before continuing toward the exit without delaying the evacuation. Meanwhile, Ethan reached the floating aircraft just as the first passengers climbed safely into the rescue rafts. He steadied one raft against the current, helping frightened travelers move away from the slowly settling jet. A flight attendant looked toward him with visible relief before suddenly turning back toward the cabin. Her expression changed in an instant. "There is still one passenger inside," she called. Without hesitation, Ethan climbed through the open doorway and disappeared into the dimly lit cabin, unaware that the decision he made in that single moment would quietly reshape the future of two families forever. The cabin felt strangely quiet despite the relentless rain striking the fuselage above, as though time itself had slowed inside the dim emergency lighting. Ethan Walker moved carefully down the narrow aisle, calling out in a calm, steady voice that carried reassurance instead of fear. "Is anyone still here? Answer me if you can." For a brief moment, there was only the distant sound of wind sweeping across the lake. Then a soft reply came from near the rear of the aircraft. "I am here." Ethan followed the voice until he found a woman kneeling beside one of the seats, holding a small leather journal tightly against her chest, while carefully steadying herself as the aircraft leaned slightly lower into the water. She looked toward him with clear blue eyes that revealed determination more than panic. "Everyone else made it out," Ethan said gently. "Now, it is your turn." Victoria Sterling nodded, taking one careful step before hesitating as the uneven cabin shifted beneath her feet. Ethan immediately offered his hand. Slow and steady. "We have time." She accepted his hand without asking who he was or why he had come. In that moment, he was simply the calm voice she needed to hear. Together, they moved toward the open exit where gray daylight filtered through the rain. The water outside had risen noticeably around the lower doorway, but the emergency raft remained close enough to reach safely. Ethan glanced toward the opening, judged the distance, then looked back at Victoria. "I will go first. Hold my shoulder and keep your eyes on me." She nodded again. "All right." Ethan stepped carefully into the cool water beside the aircraft while maintaining his grip on the doorway. "Come toward me." Victoria lowered herself with measured movements until both of them stood waist deep. Beside the floating jet, rain continued falling across the lake, reducing visibility, yet the rescue raft remained only a few yards away. Ethan guided her forward one deliberate step at a time, making certain she kept her balance as gentle waves rolled beneath them. Halfway to the raft, Victoria instinctively placed one hand across her abdomen before quickly lowering it again, a small movement Ethan noticed but did not question. His attention remained entirely on getting her safely away from the aircraft. "Almost there," he encouraged quietly. "You're doing great." A rescue volunteer reached from the raft and extended both hands. Ethan helped Victoria climb aboard first before pulling himself in behind her. The volunteer immediately wrapped a warm emergency blanket around her shoulders, while another checked each passenger with practiced professionalism. Victoria looked toward Ethan, breathing more evenly now. "I never even asked your name," she said softly. Ethan smiled with the same quiet humility that had earned the trust of everyone in Maple Ridge. "Names can wait. Right now, just stay warm." She studied him for a moment, surprised that someone willing to risk everything expected nothing in return. The flashing lights of sheriff vehicles and fire engines soon appeared along the shoreline as additional rescue boats reached the scene. Professional responders quickly took charge, assisting passengers toward waiting ambulances for routine medical evaluations. Ethan stepped quietly onto the dock, unnoticed by most of the growing crowd. A sheriff's deputy thanked him for helping before turning to coordinate arriving emergency crews. Ethan simply retrieved his soaked work boots, slipped them back on, and began walking toward his pickup truck. He never looked back to see the elegant woman watching him from the ambulance doorway, silently wondering how a complete stranger could disappear so easily after changing the course of her life forever. By the time the storm drifted east and the last streaks of rain disappeared beyond the horizon, Silver Lake had already become the leading story on every local television station. Reporters described the remarkable emergency, landing, praised the professionalism of the flight crew, and interviewed first responders who confirmed that every passenger had reached shore safely. Yet one detail remained unanswered. Several witnesses spoke of an unknown man who had reached the aircraft before any official rescue boat, helped passengers into the emergency rafts, and quietly disappeared before anyone thought to ask his name. Inside a private medical suite at St. Catherine Medical Center, Victoria Sterling sat beside a large window overlooking the city skyline. Her physician had completed every examination and delivered the news she had hoped to hear. Both she and the child she carried were healthy. Relief filled the room, but gratitude quickly replaced it. She looked down at the leather journal resting on the bedside table, gently running her fingers across its worn cover before remembering the calm face of the man who had led her through the cold water without asking for recognition. One of her senior executives entered quietly with a tablet in hand. "The board has been informed that you are safe," he said. "Everyone is relieved." Victoria nodded politely before asking the only question that truly mattered to her. "Has anyone found the man who rescued us?" The executive lowered his eyes. "Not yet. The sheriff's office interviewed several witnesses, but nobody knows who he was. He left before emergency personnel completed their reports." Victoria remained silent for a long moment. "He saved more than my life," she finally said. Her hand rested naturally across her abdomen. "He saved my child's future as well." The executive understood immediately. Without another question, he left to begin making calls. Within the hour, Victoria's chief of security assembled a small investigative team inside a conference room at company headquarters. Their assignment was simple but unusually personal. Review traffic cameras, examine emergency dispatch records, speak with sheriff deputies, firefighters, fishermen, and local residents. Find a quiet man who vanished before anyone could thank him. Meanwhile, nearly 100 miles away, Ethan Walker returned to the only life he had ever wanted. He picked Lily up from school exactly on time, smiled when she excitedly described her science project, and never mentioned the events at Silver Lake beyond saying he had helped some people during the storm. That evening, they shared homemade vegetable soup while rain tapped gently against the kitchen windows. Lily noticed the fresh scratches on her father's hands. "Did something happen today?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled reassuringly. "Someone needed help. That is all." Lily accepted the answer without another question because she had grown up watching her father quietly place other people first. After dinner, they washed dishes together, completed homework at the kitchen table, and read a chapter from their favorite adventure novel before bedtime. The world beyond Maple Ridge buzzed with news helicopters, interviews, and unanswered questions, but inside the small farmhouse life remained beautifully ordinary. Long after Lily had fallen asleep, Ethan stepped onto the front porch with a warm cup of coffee. The night air smelled fresh after the passing storm, and thousands of stars slowly returned above the peaceful fields. He never imagined that while he admired the quiet sky, an entire security team was working through the night, following one small clue after another, determined to find the humble mechanic who believed kindness should never expect applause, unaware that by sunrise, destiny would be waiting at the end of his gravel driveway. Morning sunlight spread gently across Maple Ridge, washing the gravel roads and endless cornfields in warm shades of gold, as if the violent storm had never existed. Ethan Walker had already opened the doors of Walker Auto Repair before 8 o'clock, sweeping rain-soaked leaves from the concrete floor while Lily sat nearby, finishing a school reading assignment before class. Life had returned to its familiar rhythm. A customer needed new brake pads. Another wanted an oil change before driving across the state. Ethan greeted each person with the same easy smile, never mentioning that less than 24 hours earlier he had stood beside a sinking aircraft in the middle of Silver Lake. He believed yesterday belonged to the people who had survived it, not to the man who happened to be there. Nearly 100 miles away, Victoria Sterling had slept only a few hours. Shortly after sunrise, her chief of security entered her office carrying a thin folder instead of the thick investigation file everyone expected. He placed it carefully on her desk and smiled for the first time since the search had begun. "We found him." Victoria immediately looked up. "Ow!" The security chief opened the folder. A sheriff's deputy remembered thanking an unidentified volunteer before the rescue operation expanded. One fisherman recognized the man's old pickup truck from a local repair shop. Security cameras near the public boat launch confirmed the license plate. County vehicle registration led us to Ethan Walker, owner of Walker Auto Repair in Maple Ridge. Victoria looked quietly at the photograph clipped inside the folder. It showed Ethan standing beside an aging pickup truck with grease on his hands and a gentle smile on his face while a little girl laughed beside him. There was no sign of wealth, influence, or recognition, only honesty. She studied the picture for several silent moments before asking softly, "Does he know who I am?" The security chief shook his head. "According to everyone we interviewed, he left before anyone identified you." Victoria closed the folder carefully. "Good. Then his kindness was exactly what I hoped it was." She stood and walked toward the window overlooking the city skyline. "Prepare 3 vehicles. I do not want a press conference. I do not want cameras. I simply want to thank the man who expected nothing." Less than 2 hours later, 3 polished black Cadillacs turned off the highway and entered the quiet streets of Maple Ridge, drawing curious glances from every porch and storefront they passed. The small convoy finally slowed before reaching the weathered farmhouse with a modest repair garage beside it. Neighbors paused in the middle of mowing lawns, carrying groceries, and checking mailboxes. Nobody could imagine why luxury vehicles worth more than most houses in town had arrived at Ethan Walker's driveway. Inside the garage, the sound of expensive engines caused Ethan to raise his head from beneath the hood of an old pickup truck. He wiped his hands with a shop towel, glanced toward the road, and walked outside with quiet curiosity. Lily stood beside him, holding the edge of his flannel shirt as the rear door of the center Cadillac opened. Victoria Sterling stepped onto the gravel driveway, her navy business suit catching the morning light, while her expression carried neither authority nor pride, only heartfelt gratitude. For a brief moment, the entire neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Ethan recognized her immediately, though not because of television interviews or business magazines. He remembered the determined blue eyes that had trusted him in the middle of the storm. Before he could speak a single word, Victoria crossed the driveway with calm, steady steps, stopped directly in front of him, and offered a warm handshake that quickly became a heartfelt embrace. The quiet mechanic who believed good deeds should never ask for recognition suddenly found himself standing at the center of a miracle that every witness would remember for the rest of their lives. When Victoria finally stepped back from the embrace, the quiet street remained completely still. The neighbors who had gathered along the roadside watched without speaking, trying to understand why one of the most powerful women in the country stood on a gravel driveway, looking at a small-town mechanic as though he had given her something no fortune could ever buy. Ethan smiled politely, still uncertain how to respond. "I'm glad to see you're doing well," he said. "That is all that really matters." Victoria looked at him with sincere appreciation. "That is exactly why I had to find you," she replied. She turned briefly toward the people who had arrived with her before looking back at Ethan. "May we talk?" Ethan nodded and invited her into the shade beside the garage, where an old wooden bench overlooked the fields. Lily remained nearby, quietly reading her book while listening from a respectful distance. Victoria held the small leather journal in both hands before speaking again. "Yesterday, after the doctors finished every examination, they told me something that filled me with more gratitude than I have ever known." She paused, her voice soft but steady. "The child I am expecting is healthy." Ethan smiled warmly. "That is wonderful news. Congratulations." She lowered her eyes for a moment. "You did not only save my life on that lake. Without realizing it, you protected my child's future as well." Ethan's expression became thoughtful. He remembered the brief moment when she had instinctively placed a hand across her abdomen while they stood beside the aircraft, but he had never asked why. "I simply helped someone who needed help," he answered quietly. "Anyone should have done the same." Victoria gently shook her head. "Many people hoped someone would help. You actually did." A light breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut hay across the driveway, while the wind chime, hanging from the porch, softly echoed in the silence between them. The moment felt peaceful rather than dramatic, allowing gratitude to speak louder than celebration ever could. After another quiet pause, Victoria continued. "There is something else you deserve to know. My name is Victoria Sterling." Ethan recognized the name immediately. Even in a small Nebraska town, people knew about Sterling Aerospace, the innovative company whose aircraft and technology appeared regularly in national news. He looked at her for a moment before giving a gentle smile that surprised everyone standing nearby. "Then I suppose it is nice to finally know your name." Victoria laughed softly, the tension disappearing from her face for the first time since the accident. "You are the first person I have met in years who did not react to my title before seeing me as a person." Ethan rested his hands in his pockets and looked toward the open fields stretching beyond the garage. "Titles are important at work," he said calmly. "Out here, people matter more." Those simple words settled over everyone present with quiet weight. Even Victoria's senior executives lowered their eyes, recognizing a truth that no corporate meeting had ever taught them. Lily walked over carrying 2 glasses of homemade lemonade and shyly offered one to Victoria. "My dad says guests should never leave." "Thirsty," she said with a bright smile. Victoria accepted the glass with genuine warmth, looking at the little girl, then back at the humble father who had built a life around kindness instead of recognition. She realized that the greatest wealth she had discovered was not measured in dollars, but in the quiet dignity that had quietly transformed every heart standing on that peaceful gravel driveway. Victoria placed her glass of lemonade on the old wooden bench before one of her senior executives stepped forward carrying a slim leather portfolio. The executive quietly offered it to her, but she did not open it immediately. Instead, she looked across the modest repair shop, the weathered farmhouse, and the wide Nebraska fields stretching toward the horizon. Everything about Ethan Walker's life reflected patience rather than ambition, purpose rather than appearance. "Yesterday," Victoria said softly, "my legal team prepared a check large enough to change your life forever." Ethan smiled politely before gently shaking his head. "You are very generous, but I did not help you because I expected anything in return." Victoria nodded as though she had expected that answer from the beginning. "That is exactly why I asked them to prepare something different." She opened the portfolio and carefully removed several architectural drawings along with official proposal documents bearing the Sterling Foundation seal. She spread them across the wooden bench where Ethan, Lily, and several curious neighbors could see them. At the top of the first page was a simple title, Walker Community Rescue Center. Ethan looked at the drawings with visible surprise. They showed a modern emergency response training facility overlooking Silver Lake, complete with classrooms, rescue equipment, community meeting spaces, and a scholarship program for volunteer first responders. Victoria pointed toward the plans with a quiet smile. "My foundation has already committed the funding, pending final approval by the board next week. If approved, this center will provide free water rescue training, emergency preparedness classes, and equipment for local volunteers throughout this region. Ethan remained silent, carefully studying every page before looking back at her. "Why name it after me?" Victoria answered without hesitation. "Because every person who walks through those doors should remember that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary kindness." She then placed another document beside the first. This establishes a fully funded education trust for Lily. It will remain available for any college, trade school, or professional training she chooses after high school. Lily looked at her father with wide eyes, while Ethan slowly folded the document closed. "You are offering more than anyone could ever expect," he said quietly. "But I cannot allow people to believe I accepted a reward for helping someone." Victoria smiled warmly. "Then do not think of this as a reward. Think of it as an opportunity to help thousands of people you will never meet." Her words settled gently over the gathering crowd. Ethan looked once more toward the peaceful lake visible beyond the distant trees. He remembered the helpless feeling of watching the aircraft descend, the relief of seeing every passenger reach safety, and the quiet conviction that no community should ever depend on luck when lives were at stake. After several thoughtful moments, he finally nodded. If this place teaches even one father how to bring someone home safely to their family, then it deserves to exist. Victoria's eyes brightened with quiet gratitude. "That is the answer I hoped you would give." Around them, neighbors exchanged proud smiles instead of applause, sensing they had just witnessed something far more meaningful than a generous donation. It was the beginning of a partnership built not on wealth or recognition, but on shared purpose. As the morning sun climbed higher above Maple Ridge, the old garage, the gravel driveway, and the surrounding fields seemed unchanged, yet everyone standing there understood that a simple act of compassion on a stormy afternoon had quietly become the foundation for hope that would serve generations yet to come. 1 year later, the first rays of spring sunlight shimmered across Silver Lake, where the Walker Community Rescue Center stood proudly overlooking the same water that had quietly connected two very different lives. The building had become far more than bricks and steel. Every week, families gathered there to learn emergency preparedness, volunteer rescue teams trained with modern equipment, and young people discovered that courage was not something people were born with, but something they chose when another person needed them most. Inside the main training hall, a simple bronze plaque welcomed every visitor. It did not describe wealth, titles, or achievements. It carried only a few quiet words. In honor of ordinary kindness that changed extraordinary lives. Ethan Walker walked through the center wearing the same faded flannel shirt and well-worn work boots he had always preferred. Although everyone greeted him with respect, nothing about his daily routine had changed very much. Each morning he still opened Walker Auto Repair before sunrise. Each afternoon he still repaired old trucks, helped neighbors who could not afford expensive repairs, and returned home in time to cook dinner with Lily. The rescue center had never changed who he was. It had simply allowed his quiet values to reach farther than he ever imagined. Lily, now 1 year older, had become one of the center's youngest volunteer assistants, happily organizing first aid kits and greeting visitors with the same warm smile she had inherited from her father. The education trust established in her name remained untouched for the future, but the confidence it gave her had already begun shaping the dreams she carried. She often told people she hoped to become an emergency physician one day because she wanted families to experience more happy endings than heartbreaking ones. Later that afternoon, 3 familiar black Cadillacs rolled gently into the parking lot, though by now nobody in Maple Ridge stopped to stare. The vehicles had become symbols of friendship rather than surprise. Victoria Sterling stepped out holding the hand of a cheerful little boy with bright blue eyes whose first birthday had been celebrated only weeks earlier. She smiled as the child eagerly toddled toward Ethan, who knelt to greet him with gentle laughter. Watching the scene from nearby, Lily joined them, and within moments the two children were chasing one another across the green lawn beneath a row of young maple trees planted during the center's dedication ceremony. Victoria stood quietly beside Ethan, listening to the joyful sounds of children playing while a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh grass across the lake. "You once told me that titles belong at work and people matter more," she said softly. "I think about those words almost every day." Ethan looked toward the peaceful water where sunlight danced across small waves. "Life has a way of reminding us what lasts," he answered. "Money builds buildings. Kindness builds people." Victoria nodded with grateful understanding. She had spent years measuring success through numbers, acquisitions, and achievements. Yet the greatest lesson of her life had come from a mechanic who never asked for recognition. Around them, volunteers prepared for another rescue training class while families laughed together on the lakeshore. No reporters stood nearby. No cameras recorded the moment. None were needed. The quiet miracle had never been about headlines. It had always been about one father who chose compassion before convenience, one woman who chose gratitude over pride, and two children whose futures became forever brighter because dignity, grace, redemption, and second chances found each other on an ordinary day when doing the right thing mattered more than being noticed. As the evening sun slowly settled beyond the Nebraska horizon, silence gently embraced the lake once again, and in that peaceful stillness, everyone present understood that the greatest legacy any person could leave behind was not the life they built for themselves, but the hope they quietly placed into the lives of others.